Have you ever imagined an intense confrontation that shook one of the world's greatest republics and paved the way for one of history's most powerful empires and dynasties? The rivalry between Julius Caesar and Pompey challenged the authority of the Senate and raised questions about freedom and power in Rome. Today you will discover how the ambitions of two great generals triggered an irreversible process, culminating in the destruction of a republic that had governed for centuries. But did this clash truly seal the fate of an entire civilization? The formation of the First Triumvirate in 60 BC united Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus in a curious alliance, three men sharing the power of a single city. This initial partnership brought stability, but also fueled secret rivalries. When Crassus died at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC, the balance dissolved, and the Senate grew fearful of the emergence of a single strong leader. Without Crassus, tensions ignited into a spark between Caesar and Pompey, setting off a devastating conflict. During this period, Rome already had a history of impressive conquests, expanding its borders and consolidating itself as a military power. Generals became key players in politics. Commanding legions was more important than holding titles in the Senate. Thus, when Caesar proved his worth by conquering Gaul, his popularity surged uncontrollably. This new status threatened Pompey, who found the necessary support in the Senate to curb his rival's ascent. A significant act sealed the beginning of the Civil War, crossing the Rubicon on January 10, 49 BC. By ignoring the Senate's orders and crossing this symbolic border, Caesar openly challenged the authority of Rome. In the famous phrase, "the die is cast," he made it clear that there would be no turning back and that a new era of conflict was about to begin. It was the harbinger of a structural shift, where the Republic would become the scene of increasingly intense power struggles. But how could a simple internal division impact the future of the most influential city in the ancient world so significantly? What was at stake was not just the prestige of two generals, but the very model of Roman governance. From that moment on, battles would leave deep scars and show that armies loyal to individual commanders could shake any institution. And how would Caesar's first strike against the foundations of the Republic unfold? As soon as he crossed the Rubicon, Caesar advanced with remarkable speed, taking cities with virtually no resistance. The fear his name inspired caused even adversaries to hesitate in facing him directly. Pompey, realizing the risk, opted to retreat with the Senate to the south, seeking time to organize a more solid defense. Within less than 60 days, Caesar controlled the entire Italian peninsula, a display of power that would resonate for decades. The rapid way in which Caesar gained public support was also remarkable. With a speech that extolled reforms and improvements, he reinforced the idea that he was the protector of popular interests. This propaganda tactic would be utilized by future Roman emperors, such as Augustus and Trajan, who distributed grain and benefits to the masses. The people, valued and courted, saw in Caesar not only a military leader but a potential savior, something unprecedented in the Republican structure. The takeover of Italy without major battles opened the eyes of the ancient world to Rome's fragility in its internal defense. Without a centralized protection system, the city became vulnerable to a determined general beloved by the legions. Centuries later, during the barbarian invasions of the 5th century, this flaw would again haunt the Roman Empire, resulting in the collapse of several strategic frontiers. Caesar's campaign, therefore, was a warning about the importance of organizing solid defenses within one's own territory. But if Caesar's speed and strategy gave him an initial advantage, the war was far from decided. Pompey had chosen to retreat, planning to reorganize his forces elsewhere and relying on allied troops in wealthy provinces. The decisive confrontation would not occur on Italian soil, but in the plains of the east, where giant armies would form. And it was precisely there that the fate of Rome would be irrevocably put to the test. Pompey wasted no time upon arriving in Greece, gathering a large and diverse army. Soldiers from different parts of the Hellenistic world and Egypt bolstered his ranks, forming a coalition impressive for the number of warriors. Caesar, for his part, had fewer legions, but they were highly experienced, forged in difficult campaigns. In this scenario, tension mounted, On one side, the strength of numbers. On the other, the skill and loyalty of veterans. The Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC would be the ultimate test between these two styles of combat. Despite facing supply difficulties and limited resources, Caesar fully trusted the discipline of his troops. When the confrontation began, Pompey's numerical superiority did not translate into a real advantage on the battlefield. The strategy and cohesion of Caesar's legions prevailed, resulting in a resounding defeat for Pompey's army. Defeated, Pompey fled to Egypt, seeking refuge in a kingdom that, until then, had been a strategic ally of Rome. However, upon arrival, he was assassinated by local leaders trying to curry favor with Caesar and secure good relations with the likely victor. Little did they know that this act would have profound repercussions on how Rome would view its allies. Egypt, a vital piece of the Roman economy, would soon become one of the empire's most important provinces. And so, Caesar's victory at Pharsalus and Pompey's death marked a shocking turning point in Roman history. It was as if the fate of the ancient world was decided at the tip of swords and the blood of a great general. But the struggle for power would not end there. Caesar would still need to consolidate his position within a wounded republic full of internal enemies. What, then, would be the final step to transform this military power into absolute control over Rome? With Pompey out of the way, Caesar moved to become the supreme leader of Rome. He began to reform the political structure, reinstating old opponents, and distributing positions to allies in an attempt to pacify the landscape. However, his ascent to the position of dictator for life in 44 BC sparked new fears of tyranny. The Senate, already weakened, watched these changes without the same strength it once had, confirming that generals now dictated the course of the state. Caesar's figure embodied both the hope for change and the risk of absolute power, which divided public opinion in Rome. Some saw him as the only one capable of curbing senatorial corruption. Others feared that his authority would completely dethrone the republican traditions. The truth is that his presence clearly demonstrated how politics and military force became inseparable. This pattern would be repeated throughout the future of the Roman Empire, where the emperor would be above all the military chief. The assassination of Caesar in 44 BC was a desperate attempt to reverse this trend. Led by Brutus and other senators, the coup aimed to save the republic from an alleged tyranny. However, the dictator's death plunged Rome into yet another civil war, now involving Mark Antony, Octavian, future Augustus, and Caesar's own assassins. Instead of resurrecting the republican model, Caesar's final act merely precipitated the emergence of a new regime. Ultimately, the figure of the emperor would consolidate in Octavian Augustus, who, after defeating his rivals, took full control and put an end to the illusions of a sovereign senate. Thus, the foundations for the Roman Empire were firmly planted, and the echoes of the Caesar versus Pompey conflict would continue to resonate for generations. But this was just the first chapter in a long tradition of internal wars that would shape Rome. Would these disputes become an inevitable pattern within the very borders of the empire? The conflict between Caesar and Pompey inaugurated a sad pattern. Whenever the succession of power became murky, swords spoke louder than laws. The year of the four emperors in 69 AD proved this by showing that any general could claim the throne if they had enough military support. A true test of endurance for Rome, which lived under the constant shadow of revolts and usurpations. And this didn't happen solely due to individual ambition, but also due to the lack of a stable succession system. The crisis of the 3rd century, 235–284 AD, was another extreme example, with over 20 emperors taking the throne in just over 50 years. Practically all rose to power through military means, repeating Caesar's pattern. Those who controlled the legions also controlled the fate of the empire. This frenzied instability undermined the economy, the security of the borders, and the people's confidence in the established order. What began as an isolated episode in the Republican period became the norm in the imperial period. It is interesting to note that this series of internal conflicts shook the very structure of the Roman Empire itself, leaving it vulnerable to external threats. While generals vied for the title of emperor, barbarian tribes tested the borders and strategic provinces rebelled. Without a clear hierarchy, military resources were often used for fratricidal struggles instead of protection against external enemies. This vicious cycle would compromise Rome's cohesion in the long term. And to think that it all had a precursor in the personal confrontation between Julius Caesar and Pompey, at a time when the Republic was still trying to maintain an aura of political stability. These early steps showed how the strength of a leader and the loyalty of soldiers could subvert the power of the Senate. But was this phenomenon limited to the capital, or did it also impact the provinces that formed the foundation of the empire and its subsequent dynasties? The Civil War made it clear that real power was in the hands of whoever commanded the legions. The Senate, once the ultimate symbol of authority, found itself reduced to an advisory body, increasingly dependent on the favor of generals. With Caesar, the militarization of politics truly began, transforming the military leader into the leader of the state. This logic would persist throughout the Principate of Augustus and subsequent emperors, consolidating a regime where the sword spoke louder than oratory. During the empire, the Praetorian Guard, for example, symbolized this military power within the capital itself. Established to protect the emperor, it was also capable of deposing rulers and influencing the choice of successors. It was the same principle applied on a large scale. Whoever controlled the troops wielded de facto power. Thus, the transition from republic to empire was not merely a change in titles, but a profound restructuring of governmental frameworks. There is also the example of Constantine, AD 312, who defeated a civil war against Maxentius and became emperor, altering not only politics but also the official religion of Rome by favoring Christianity. These moves reinforce how military might serve as a passport for reforms and influences that reached all of Roman society. In the dynasties that formed, the emperor was, above all, a supreme commander, legitimized by military successes. The militarization of Roman politics, which germinated in the Republican era, flourished intensely in the empire. It defined who could govern and who should submit, ensuring that the figure of the general was more feared than any institution. And as generals emerged and fell, the provinces watched each movement closely, knowing that their fates were tied to the decisions of an increasingly militarized central power. But how did Egypt, in particular, fit into this board of influences? Pompey's flight to Egypt revealed the strategic importance of that region, an allied kingdom that could become a refuge or a trap. After Pompey's death, Caesar established Cleopatra as queen, simultaneously ensuring his political influence and access to the resources of Egypt. This was just the beginning of a process of integration in which Egypt, rich in grain, would become the primary supplier for the Roman capital. Without the supply of food, even the strongest legions would see their power crumble. With the effective conquest of Egypt, Rome not only expanded its domains, but also reinforced the idea that maintaining loyal provinces was crucial for the survival of the empire. Subsequently, any crisis in that region turned into a crisis for the entire Roman structure, as occurred during the Egyptian revolt of AD 172. This episode shook the reign of Marcus Aurelius, demonstrating how instability in a single province could trigger a domino effect. Egypt, therefore, became a symbol of how provinces were a vital part of the imperial machinery. In this vast puzzle, each conquered territory served a specific role. Some provided grain, others minerals, while some protected borders against invasions. It was a complex system that depended on strong central leadership, something that Caesar initiated and his successors would perfect. Thus, the model of empires and dynasties that Rome would lead for centuries was consolidated. And to think that all of this structure of power and wealth arose from a single decision, that of a general to cross a river, challenging the conventions of an ancient republic. Egypt, a prosperous kingdom, became just one more piece on the Roman board, essential for the sustenance of a colossal empire. But what lessons can we draw by observing the fate of the Roman Republic disintegrating amidst ambitions and private armies? Perhaps the answer lies in a deep understanding of how power consolidated after the Civil War. The civil war between Caesar and Pompey was much more than a simple clash of two generals. It opened the doors to the fall of a secular republic and the rise of an empire that would mark world history. It showed the world that politics and military force could merge into a single instrument of power, especially when institutional authority fails to prevail. Rome's destiny changed forever, when the ambition of its leaders superseded the common good. And what would have happened if Pompey had emerged victorious? This question leads us to reflect. Would the Republic have survived, or would another figure have followed in Caesar's footsteps? In a weakened system, history seems to point toward the inevitability of conflicts and internal disputes. In any case, it is undeniable that the Republican model was already worn out, incapable of managing such a vast and diverse territory. The transition to empires and dynasties was almost a natural consequence, driven by charismatic leaders and powerful generals. Now it's your turn to delve into this historical enigma. Share your opinion in the comments. If Pompey had triumphed, would Rome have followed the same imperial path, or would the Republic find the strength to renew itself? Each perspective enriches the debate and shows how history still sparks passions. After all, understanding the past can teach us a lot about power, politics, and the need to find a balance between solid institutions and strong leadership. If you enjoyed this journey through antiquity, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with your friends and family. This way, we will continue to unravel the great narratives of Rome and other empires and dynasties that have marked humanity. After all, knowing our history helps us to better understand the present and see the future clearly. See you soon with more revelations about the backstage of the ancient world.